Anything could be at the root of it. Clearly, weather will not be discounted as a result of this. We spoke to a worker at Ruth's Steakhouse across the street, and she says she sees everyone exiting the building. They're just running out of the building. She says this is a financial building for the most part. Clearly, the sound of a helicopter coming down with that kind of force on a building is going to be a frightening experience. Another woman who works at I Love You New York by Phantom of Broadway across the street on 7th Avenue says she sees smoke coming from the top of the building. And from these images that we're getting now from some of our digital cameras along the way, you can see that there is smoke at the scene. And again, it's difficult because of the rain that is falling to determine how much of the picture you're looking at has to do with the weather and the conditions, how much of it from smoke being generated from what appears to be a fire on the roof of the building at 787. No word yet officially. We're trying to get the police department, emergency management to give us updates in terms of what the very latest is on this building. But as I said, we do know just from eyewitnesses that people have been leaving this building on their own. Clearly, the fire department is on the scene trying to deal with this as well as dealing with whatever kind of a fire situation they're dealing with. Their high-rise fire team must be on the scene at this point. Now, the FDNY is just handing to me is saying the helicopter, in fact, did crash land onto the building. So much more than a possible landing. Not sure at this point if there is a landing pad or not on top of this building, as there are in many buildings in Midtown. But this indicates that whatever happened with force and could be behind the shaking of the building and the smoke that we're seeing coming out from that area. Clearly, they're treating this as a fire on top of that building. Hard to tell what could possibly be the case. We've gone through a number of helicopter crashes in our area over time, various reasons, whether it be pilot error, whether it be some kind of mechanical issue. And again, we're not going to rule out even intentional until we know better, and as far as we get the investigation continues in this. As live picture starts to come in, I should say taped picture comes in of the scene, you can see the rain is coming down very heavy in this area. People are outside the street outside the building at 787 UBS building. Hang on just a second. I've got Lee Goldberg right next to me. Lee, what's the latest you're giving us?
Well, the ceiling's down to about 500 feet. Definitely heavy mist. Visibilities are at their lowest of the day. So obviously we have some pretty terrible weather conditions out there now.
Well, that's not going to help anything. And clearly, as the investigation continues, we'll find out if weather played a role in this helicopter crashing on top of this building. This is a big building. This is a building, a high-rise in the Midtown area of 7th Avenue and 51st Street. Many occupants, commercial building. So clearly, they'll want to get as many people out of that building right now as a safety precaution and as they deal with the fire on top of the roof of this building. New York City, very well equipped and very well practiced in dealing with high-rise fires. They'll approach it from different angles, of course, but the complication of having a helicopter as well involved in this on the top and with the fuel that's involved with that would be very difficult to deal with. And as a result, you can imagine, I'm getting handed a note here right now that as a safety precaution, multiple buildings in the area are being evacuated. Much of that may be from precaution. Much of it may also be from the fact that there is an ongoing fire situation on the roof of a building at 787. Again, this is 51st 7th Avenue. If you're familiar with the area, it's right across the street from the Winter Garden Theater, Manhattan at Times Square. There's a number of big businesses in the area. Empire State Corporate Apartments are located right near there. This building itself has a multi-use building. There's a Citibank inside it we know of, a Starbucks that's part of it, and of course office space as well. And as we're getting from eyewitnesses, everyone in that building being evacuated along with multiple buildings alongside of it as they deal with the emergency response to this helicopter crash landing, as we've been hearing in terms of how that helicopter landed there and the impact it had. It came down with quite a bit of force. Lee Goldberg has been tracking the weather conditions for us as we continue to follow this and get our crews on the ground. Lee, tell me a little bit more about what kind of weather situation we're dealing with right now.
Well, you know, the rain has been as its steadiest throughout the day, and really even in just the last half hour, we got a pulse up of some of these heavy downpours, and we've had this sort of low cloud and fog situation for a while now. The ceiling is down to about 500 feet, and in terms of the actual horizontal visibility, it's about a mile. So very challenging conditions for all types of travel this afternoon, and I would say the rain is probably at its steadiest of the day. You can just see by that picture, roadways are wet. You can barely see up to the north. It looks like the south end of the Central Park that we're looking at from Midtown, from 7th Avenue. So we've got some some steady rainfall. We got visibilities at about a mile on the horizontal, and your ceilings are down to about 500 feet. So weather conditions, we're obviously not sure what caused this, but certainly could have compromised travel conditions and conditions for a pilot of a helicopter. David?
Yeah, I'm not a pilot. I don't pretend to be one, but you just get, the idea of a helicopter in this rain, in these kind of conditions is going to raise some questions, of course. Now, just hand it to me that as a result of this situation, 7th Avenue south of 57th Street, and I'm not sure how far south, but significantly, they're creating a perimeter around this, is closed to traffic. So they want anybody in that area to get out of there again. And this is all per fire official, a helicopter making a hard landing under the roof of the building. They're going to change the terminology as we go and continue through this. So 1 minute we're telling you crash, the next second we're hearing it was a hard landing. You have to forgive us in terms of trying to get that information to you. A lot of the first responders are going to use language that will probably change along the way. To me, as a reporter, when I hear hard landing, that's less of an impact than a crash that might have been one that was completely out of control. That may change some more. But at any rate, what the fire official is saying, whatever happened, however it landed on top of this building, it resulted in a fire. And we still don't know the status, the condition of the pilot or anybody else was on board. We don't know yet the name of the helicopter, who they were working for, who was on board, where it was going. Many questions still unanswered and will be answered very shortly, I'm sure, as this response gets to the scene. Again, we're staying on live because information is coming into us at the second and evolving. A fire has broken out on the roof of a building at 787. This is right there at the intersection of 51st Street and 7th Avenue. The latest we're being told from the fire department is that a helicopter made a hard landing onto the roof of this building. Still unknown to our staff here whether this building has a helipad or not, but whatever it is, it came down hard enough that it caused a resulting fire. You can actually see from some of the video that we have gotten and some of the pictures, smoke coming from the roof. This shot we're on right now is showing you basically 7th Avenue and the area in front of it, 51st Street, 7th Avenue area. And again, they're closing just about everything south of 57th Street so that they can get the first responders there to the scene. Tacking a high-rise building such as this one is never an easy one, but they are well practiced at dealing with it right now. Lee, are you still on top of this?
Yeah, Dave, the winds I was just checking out, I mean, nothing out of the ordinary. I think it's more of a visibility issue. They're working out of the east at about 15 miles an hour. There's some gusts over 20. Maybe just, I haven't seen many sudden gusts with this particular situation. I think it's more of a visibility issue. And you see just some of the visibilities around the area. And I'm going to go ahead and just take you down in tight. And you see, I mean, Central Park is actually the lowest visibility, about a half a mile right now. And again, the ceiling around 500 feet. So visibilities were low. Here's the rainfall right now across the area. I mean, we've got some of our heavier downpours, which are across the 5 boroughs. So if you had to pick, one point of the day where our weather was at its worst, it has been within the last hour. Dave?
Lee, what kind of gusts have you been seeing? I mean, how much have they pushed up?
The gusts haven't been over 20 miles an hour in the city. They've been a little stronger to the east. So I don't think you're seeing anything too out of the ordinary. It's more of a visibility and a rainfall issue.
All right, so obviously something we're going to be dealing with. We've been telling you this address of this building is 787, and I'm told by our research staff here that it's known as the Equitable Building. Clearly, it's a building, a multi-use building, as I said before. From what I can see here, it's got a Citibank inside it. There's a Starbucks inside it. On the first floor, a lot of commercial business there, and all of that, I'm being told, is being evacuated, along with multiple buildings alongside of it as a precaution to this incident. Again, the official word, and here we have live pictures now of the scene, and you can see that our camera has been forced back for quite a distance out of precaution right now, but still at this moment, first responding fire department vehicles are turning up at the scene. It's, again, 787 7th Avenue is where this is located, and as you can see right now from that live picture, and we continue back with the digital cameras that we have that shows you the presence there, there is a significant fire department response as well as police and other emergency service response. No word yet of any injuries as a result of this, but they are taking every precaution by setting up a perimeter around this area at 51st and 7th Avenue, where this helicopter made what is now being described as a hard landing on top of this building. They're setting up a perimeter at a precaution and for the first responders to get to the scene and to deal with the effort of putting out that fire before it extends. They may have a bigger issue on the hand right now, and that is whether this moves onto the building itself or onto any other building next to it. But high-rise fires, fighting them, there's probably no better fire department in the world that's prepared for this. The New York City Fire Department, and we've done many stories as they deal with these kind of situations, are in place, responding almost immediately to the reports of an incident at this address at 787 51st 7th Avenue. Again, this happened a little bit about 2 o'clock, a little bit before 2 o'clock. Back to our live camera, which is from a distance, but you can see some of the water there right now that's on our camera, because that's been the story of the day. It's been rainy, visibility has been low, a gust of wind here and there, but anything so significant. And I can't help but go back to the weather again and again, because Lee Goldberg has been tracking it, and you wonder, Lee, you know, how much an incident like this, how much the weather plays in it. So although it's early on, Lee, just give us up to date on where we're dealing with when we're talking about the weather.
Well, you know, one thing to consider, Dave, is, one thing to consider, Dave, even in our own coverage, our own newscopter is grounded today because of the low visibilities and the low ceiling. So obviously not optimal flying conditions. I have a radar up right now. I mean, it's also not an easy rescue situation, because we've got some of the steadiest rain of the day. It's kind of a heavy, steady, dense mist, very, very wet out there. Visibility's down to about a half a mile, and the ceiling's down to about 500 feet. So the winds, while I told you earlier, you know, 15, 20-mile-an-hour gusts, remember, within the Manhattan and the big buildings, that sometimes does get accelerated a little bit. So you don't know what type of impact it may have had in that kind of, you know, low flight in a helicopter situation. So, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. We know very little about the situation right now, but obviously the weather situation really tough with a lot of heavy rain around the area right now. Dave?
You bring up a great point, Lee, and anybody who's a veteran of living or working in New York City know that the building situation sometimes funnels that air and creates a wind effect that you might not expect, even if you're looking on the maps in terms of what is wind or not out there that people are dealing with. And if you just catch it in the wrong spot, it could be a factor. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because we don't know that wind was a factor in this. We don't know if the weather was a factor in any of this. And clearly, these are the kind of things that we're going to be tracking as we continue to follow. I'm getting new information in. Let me see what I'm looking at here. I'm told that we have Shannon Sohn, our newscopter reporter, on the phone. Shannon, have you been tracking this story?
Yeah, we've been watching the story. It's so horrific.
What can you tell us? What's your first impression from what you've seen so far?
You know, it's such an upsetting situation to see anything like this happening, but this is something that you have to look at weather and consider whether or not it's a factor in this. We, of course, are on the ground. That's why you're talking to me on the phone instead of from Newscopter 7. But I was looking at all the weather, and that's something that we collect as pilots and in our case as reporters, as crew members of a flight crew. You're looking at the weather all the time, and right now there's instrument flight rules in effect at pretty much all of the area airports.
Shannon, I just want to interrupt just for a second, if I may, and it's sad news. We're being told officially, and we can confirm, that there is one DOA in this case. Someone died in this accident, and we're also being told that the fire has been mostly extinguished, which says something incredible in terms of the response to this kind of an issue. Also, Governor Cuomo has arrived at the location and is being briefed, as I'm sure all the top officials here in the city are on top of this as well. And Shannon, you know, this is everybody that steps into a helicopter, whether it be a reporter like yourself or the pilot you fear the most, a death to report in a helicopter accident, especially on top of a roof of a high-rise in Midtown.
Yeah, it is really your worst nightmare. But when you consider the fact that this helicopter went down on top of a roof, and you consider what the weather conditions are right now, it really, you have to wonder whether or not it played a factor. Where they were at 787 7th Avenue near 51st Street, that is where we have so many high-rise buildings, and that would put them inside LaGuardia's airspace. Right now, LaGuardia is reporting only 0.5 miles visibility and 500-foot ceilings. When we fly over the city, we have to clear at least 1,500 feet. 2,000 feet is where we need to be comfortable flying above the city at that point, because what happens is if you don't have that much altitude and something goes wrong with the helicopter, there's nowhere for you to go. Our goal all the time when we're flying over the city is to know that if something goes wrong, that we can make it to either river, to avoid crashing into a building in New York City. So you need ceilings that are much higher than what the buildings are. And right now, your ceilings are only 500 feet. So once you get above 500 feet in the helicopter right now, you're going to be completely in the clouds, and your forward visibility is really only about a half a mile. So the conditions are not great for a helicopter that's flying over New York City. So that's something that's certainly going to be looked at. Of course, every company has different standards that they operate by. These are our standards, but one of the things we're always considering is having enough room to navigate the helicopter away from the city in case of some kind of a malfunction.
It's definitely going to raise questions. I don't want to get ahead of the investigation, but considering the conditions out there, considering you and your pilot and our helicopter refused to fly in these conditions is significant. It's something for us to consider. Lieutenant, I need to ask you, do you know if there was a helipad on top of this building?
There is not. There is not any helipads over any of the buildings in New York City. You've got the heliports on either side of the river, on the East River as well as the West Side, but there are none over the city, and it's likely for this very reason that we don't have helipads on the buildings in New York City. So, you know, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't know what happened. We don't know if there was a malfunction that caused this to happen or the weather was the instigating factor in the crash, but it could very well be that there was a mechanical problem and landing on the rooftop of the building put the least amount of people in harm's way. Obviously, it didn't go that way. You know, it wasn't a clean landing. But again, that's an investigation that's going to happen. But weather always plays a factor. Even a beautiful day is playing a factor in whether or not we fly. So it's always a factor whenever you take off in an airplane.
No
and
question.
As you mentioned, right, and the winds are always a question, and especially there are swells that are caused by the buildings in New York City. It's literally, you mentioned it, it's almost its own atmosphere, but a lot of this visibility is going to be something that's put into question because it's bad out there and it's raining hard as well.
And no kidding. And you know, we just got from the governor, one of the big questions immediately whenever you hear about an aircraft hitting a building in Manhattan was terrorism part of this? Yeah, and clearly they're still going to continue this investigation. But there is, I guess, some relief in hearing because the governor just announced moments ago in a quick presser, he says there is no indication of terrorism at this time. Shannon, stay on line for me. We got Michelle Charlesworth on the ground. I want to go to her right now and get the latest from her perspective. Michelle Charlesworth, where are you live and what can you tell us?
David, we're at the corner of West 52nd Street and 7th Avenue. Let me get out of the way. A lot of people here across the street taking pictures. Just folks, you can see down the street, Mark, if we just shoot straight down 7th Avenue, you can see first responders down there ready to assist. We understand this was a fire on the rooftop. There's no visual here on the ground, I can tell you. It's the Equitable building here at 787 7th Avenue. But we do understand there's a fire situation on the rooftop where this crash landing happened of a helicopter this afternoon. No word yet for us here on the ground regarding injuries or what was happening when this helicopter crash landed at the top of 787. This is the Equitable building on 7th Avenue. Again, we're at the corner of 52nd Street. Right now, we can just see a huge response from the FDNY and police responding to this call this afternoon. Again, no visual as we look up into the sky from here on the ground at 52nd and 7th. And I haven't been able to hear your reporting on this, so that's everything I can tell you right now.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you for the update. Let me just go through it for our viewers who may just be joining us. Sometime in the 2 o'clock hour, we got word of a helicopter making what's been described as a hard landing on top of the building at 787, that Equitable building that Michelle is outside of right now. And we have learned that caused a fire, which I'm told also has been mostly extinguished at that point. However, there is a DOA that we're being told is part of this accident. The person who died is believed to either have been the pilot or possibly a passenger, but they believe it was someone inside that chopper. No word of any injuries outside of where that helicopter hit on the roof of 787. As a result, though, there was a fire, and as a precaution, the building was evacuated, as was multiple buildings in the area as a precaution. As you can see, the emergency response was quick and significant. A big part of Manhattan is being shut down as a result of this. Anything south of 7th Avenue is right now pretty much 7th Avenue, 57th Street, all of that is closed as the first responders deal with the situation, and we've got multiple cameras right now. As you can see, even though there was some evacuation in the buildings around, you see a lot of the press gathering right now, and the governor's on the scene, so they're looking to get updates from him when we can get it. But there's not a panic in the area. There seems to be a lot of people have left the scene or getting into safe places, learning more about what happened in this case, and at least at the very much situation on the ground, there seems to be calm. There seems to be people taking control in terms of the first responders, and we're going to continue to follow the very latest. Again, this fire appears to have been extinguished, at least mostly extinguished from the top. I'm getting handed some new information. I just want to check it out right now and see what it is. Yeah, it does not, as I said before, it does not appear anyone in the building was injured. And for now, as you would imagine, the surrounding streets are going to remain closed. Actually, and this is some new information, there is some debris and a fuel leak that was created by this helicopter making its hard landing onto the roof of this building at it's the Equitable building at 787. But nothing beyond the one dead that we know about. No other injuries to report, neither in the building nor on the ground at this point. Only one, and I guess the guessing at this point, because they can't tell for sure until they really get to the scene, is that it was someone in the chopper who died, and not sure if it was would assume it was the pilot, or possibly there was a passenger, but we don't know. We just don't know exactly, or why the helicopter was in the air at this point. Many questions are going to come up as to what was the reason behind that helicopter flying in this kind of weather. Well, one thing we have been reassured by the governor is that there is no indication of terrorism at this time, that this is a situation that they're treating, at least initially right now, as an accident. A helicopter coming down hard onto the rooftop of a building in Midtown. It was something that happened around 2 o'clock. Conditions, Lee Goldberg has been following these conditions for us. He knows the very latest in terms of the weather conditions, and has been saying that visibility is low, and our chopper has not been able to go up on its own because of our concerns with the flight path and the conditions in the area. But whatever reason this helicopter went up, there were gusts, not significant, but enough to something to consider. And considering also the high-rise situation in the area, there's always the concern that one of those gusts could have led to this, or it could simply have been a mechanical or pilot error. No word yet. I was just handed a statement from the FAA, and let me read it to you live for you. We are gathering information about an accident involving a helicopter that crashed into a building in Midtown Manhattan. We will post a statement as soon as we have confirmed information, and then they tell you to go contact the NYPD and the fire department for information about the scene. We're also told that Mayor de Blasio is on the way to the scene. Of course, we just had heard from, not on camera, but our reporters heard from Governor Cuomo, who is there, and gave no indication that it's not a situation of terrorism. We're going to go right now to former Fire Commissioner Thomas Van Essen, who we just got on the phone. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us on the last second on this. Have you been up to date on the fire and what's going on there? I want to check with my producers. I was told that former Fire Commissioner Thomas Van Essen is on the phone, and just check in. Okay, we don't have him yet. I'm sorry. So again, let's go back to what we know. About 2 o'clock, we have a helicopter come down hard on top of a building at 787, the Equitable building in Manhattan. That is located in Midtown. It's right there at 51st and 7th Avenue. That landing causes a death. We don't know who that was inside the helicopter, whether it was a pilot or a passenger, but somebody in that helicopter has passed away as a result. That, in turn, caused a fire. The fire, at this point, I am told, is mostly extinguished, but as a precaution, that building evacuated, as well as a building alongside of it, and multiple buildings, for that matter, have been evacuated. In addition, traffic all 7th Avenue south of 57th Street is closed as a precaution and as a way of getting first responders to the scene so that they can do what needs to be done to help in this situation. As we report this, we have several reporters on the scene, and I believe my producer is telling me we do have former Fire Commissioner Thomas Van Essen on the line. Tom, are you there?
Yes, how you doing?
Great to have you. Thank you for making time at the last second. Are you up to speed with what's going on? Do you need me to fill you in from our perspective, or are you up to date on the problem here?
No, I think I am. I got one fatality, and I think it was the pilot. That was the last I heard.
Okay, and a helicopter came down hard, caused a fire that I'm told was mostly extinguished, and they evacuated the building. You're the perfect person to ask about how the fire department responds to a situation like this.
Yeah, you know, they bring as many people as they possibly think they might need in a worst-case scenario. So you've got all kinds of rescue units and special units and all the special operations people. You've got people, all the special skills, just in case they need to, you know, do crazy things that same like the police with ESU. But it looks to me so far, and you're doing a lot of speculation on this fire, because I would thought you had better information by now, that it was just a small incident on the roof. It's a horrible incident, of course, for the pilot or anybody else in the helicopter that was killed or injured. But it doesn't look like it's going to be more than that. They do everything to maximize the safety of the people in the building, and they want to get them in the stairwells, get them out, get them down as quickly as possible. I understood there was some debris in the street, though, so you have to be careful of that also. Yeah,
and also reports of fuel, which, of course, is an added concern. The high-rise team, we've done stories. It's just remarkable how you guys are able to attack fires and deal with them in this city. Tell me a little bit about the complication added with a helicopter being on fire and the fuel attached to that.
Well, again, the reports that we have, that I've seen so far, it was really a small fire. So I don't know whether it was the helicopter or it was some of the parts of the, the heating units on the roof, or other things that were on the roof that went on fire.
Right.
If it was the helicopter, then of course when the guys get up there, they're very concerned about that exploding on them. But if it wasn't, you really don't know. I mean, if it was the helicopter and they got it out quickly, it just shows you how fast they can get up there. They must have used the elevators, and they were able to, put it out. If they had to walk up, it certainly would have been a lot longer of an operation.
Right.
I guess the original reports, I'm sure the fire safety folks in the building got up there right away, determined that it did not affect the elevators, and the guys were able to use them. If they weren't, it's a whole different operation.
You know, it just harkens me back to the fact that helicopter rooftop landing pads were banned after that fatal copter crash in May of 1977 on the roof of a Pan Am building. The idea to avoid this kind of situation, and you as a commissioner, I know you're well aware of that incident and the precautions that are in the city when it comes to aircrafts flying in this space, correct?
Well, when you think back to the Trade Center also, we were criticized by some folks for not rescuing people off the roof, and it was because of that procedure that was in place, because it is so dangerous to land a helicopter. You can see today, just a normal spring day, how windy it is out there and the gusts of wind. So the winds that those helicopter guys face in the streets of Manhattan are pretty fierce sometimes, and that's why you just don't want these kinds of landings. Of course, this was a forced landing. I don't criticize this guy. He just did probably an emergency. Right. You wouldn't want it on a regular basis, and it was one of the reasons we did not try to rescue people from the Trade Center with the helicopter, all the wires up there and the antennas and everything.
That's a great point. Tom, thank you so much. Stay on the line for us just a moment. I know our producers have some questions for you. I want to introduce our anchor, Bill Ritter, who's joining me on the desk here. Bill, I know that while I've been doing this, you've been so helpful getting me information and bringing in the latest. If you got anything new that's come in.
You know, Tom just raised a really good point. Tom, are you still on the line? If Tom's still on the line, Tom, hi, how are you? It's Bill Ritter. You just raised a very good point, and that is while Dave pointed out that it's been banned since 1977, helicopter roof landings, he was trying to save lives. He was trying to make sure that this helicopter, which whatever the problem was, some sort of mechanical failure, whatever, didn't go down apparently onto the streets, which would have been catastrophic.
Absolutely. You know, this guy could wind up being a phenomenal hero. Who knows? We're speculating. Right. But that he did what he had to do to minimize the damage. Those roofs can handle a helicopter, even if it crashes. You know, it would be a minimum amount of damage, except for the debris that might be falling into the street. But It's a lot worse than you're right, Bill, coming down lunch hour on 7th Avenue, Manhattan.
Just a frightening thought. And we want to just reiterate at this opportunity that the governor is saying, he just did a quick presser, that there is no indication of terrorism. And this is appearing at this stage of the investigation to be an accident. Perhaps, as Tom has just mentioned, it was a heroic effort by the pilot to prevent it from hurting people on the ground, and that's why he ended up hard on top of that roof. Perhaps it was weather that pushed him there, or perhaps a mechanical or pilot error. Still way too early to know what caused it. We're still in the stage of dealing and responding to it. Right, Bill?
Right, exactly. And Tom, thank you for your help there. You know, it's interesting. The president has just been informed of this by the White House staff, the White House confirming that. And because of the president's election, Mr. Trump's election, there is a temporary flight restriction over this section of Midtown, has been since the November election of 2016. So the guy wasn't supposed to be flying there, but somehow he managed to get on there, whether he decided at the last minute to scoot over to 7th Avenue or he went somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. We just don't know. The mystery of this is still folded, and we have to unfold it.
Yeah, and you may have tapped on something. And again, this is all preliminary, and we're getting information handed to us by the second. And the pilot is believed to be the person who died in this incident. And the preliminary indication is that the aircraft was having trouble. He may not have meant to come to Midtown. He may not have meant to be anywhere near this area, or he may have intentionally forced that helicopter onto the roof as a way of keeping it from going to the ground. We still don't know, but the early indication is that it's less to do with the weather, although surely the weather must have had some impact on him flying. The visibility was very low. The rain was coming in. There were tiny gusts, but they could come up because of the buildings and where they're creating a tunnel effect, if you will. But the initial indications, if you throw in that this is accurate, that the aircraft that was having trouble, that can make for a very dangerous situation. You're looking at a live picture right now, right outside the building. This is 787. Many of you know it as the Equitable Building, and it's a high-rise building, multi-use kind of building.
We know, of course, that a lot of the new development doesn't have that kind of flat roof that might allow a helicopter to land. ABC News now reporting that preliminary word from law enforcement sources, that's what they're saying, just sources, the helicopter was in trouble and tried to put down at the nearest flat spot. So that would confirm some of what Tom was saying, what you were just wondering about as well, David. So that's, how many flat buildings are there between, let's say, the water where they're okay to fly, and downtown and Midtown, and this may have been the closest building, the highest building.
The story behind this is going to unfold by the minute, and I think that we're going to learn a lot more. Still very impressive is the response here in the city and how quickly everybody has gotten to the scene. And I want to just remind everyone, of course, we're streaming much of the video on this, and we will continue to stream all of this and bring you live reports on abc7ny.com. Our digital arm of the news is going to be bringing you, if you need to step away from the TV, you can stay with it on your phone or any other device that you have. We have a team of reporters responding to this who are on different locations. And I'm looking at a camera of Michelle Charlesworth, as you are right now, getting ready to give us a report from the scene as well.
Again, just to reset this, at 2:40, at about 2 o'clock, a helicopter. We don't know how many people were on board. We know the pilot, apparently, one person has died. It appears to be the pilot.
And we think it was not 2:40, but earlier. It was maybe like around 2.
I said 2 o'clock. It's 2:40 now.
Right.
And just to reset this, West 52nd and West 57th Street, 6th and 7th Avenues are closed between those two streets. So this is a mess in Midtown as we get ready to enter the evening commute hour. During the rain and for the evening commute coming forward, this is going to be closed for some time. There is a ton of fire emergency responders at the scene. We heard them here, a half a mile away at Columbus Avenue and 66th Street. We heard them whizzing by, getting to the scene. As you can see, there's a lot, as David's been coverage.
Eyewitness News reporter Sandra Bookman has just arrived on the scene. Let's check in with Sandra. Sandra, where are you? What can you tell us? You know what? I think Sandra's having trouble hearing us, so we'll go back to Sandra when she is ready. You talked about the response and how, all the avenues are closed and, as it is, traffic is bad. Imagine, all the evacuations on top of that occurred, and that's going to add to confusion and a lot of congestion there on that street.
Exactly, and, as people pour out of that into the rain, it's not a very pleasant sight. Michelle Charlesworth is now up and ready to give us perspective from her. Exactly where are you, Michelle?
We moved half a block south. We were at 52nd and 7th. We were giving you that camera picture live Straight across from us is the Equitable building. You can see 787 actually above the doorway. But as you look up, I know Mark Abraham's on the camera giving you a pretty clear shot of what we're looking at. There's no visual as we look up. Pardon? Oh, you've got the overhead. Oh, darn. Well, as we look up at the building, all we can see is a little bit of cloudiness, and that's it. You can see the top of the building, but there's no visual here. Down here on the ground, you can see we're literally standing right in front of the Equitable building, and there are 15 fire trucks around here. We literally got through everything just behind us. They were closing streets as we were driving here to the scene. We are not being briefed at this point. We haven't heard if there's going to be a news conference anytime soon. Let me get out of the way so you can see the front of the building. But that's 787 right there. That is the Equitable building. Again, 15 fire trucks, a half a dozen ambulances all here, first responders assembled to deal with anyone who was hurt. But now we're hearing that we had the one fatality. No confirmation yet on whether or not that was the pilot. Highly unusual, of course, to be flying in weather like this. And, of course, unusual to crash land. Those are the words of the FDNY on a rooftop.
Michelle, I'm going to interrupt you.
Under dire circumstances. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have an eyewitness on the phone, and she can't stay with us too long, so I want to get to her right away. I know you don't want to give your name right now, but could you tell us what you saw and where you were when you saw it?
Hello, ma'am. Hi, you're on the air, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. You're on the air with Dave Navarro and Bill Ritter. Can you hear us?
We are having problems with that connection, sadly. We're going to try and get back to her in a moment and give you the very latest. As you can imagine, there's going to be many eyewitnesses to this event, at least the aftermath of it, because there's so many people in that area, possibly even some video at this point.
Lee Goldberg just came up and said he's got a whole plan. He went back and sort of traced what the weather was like at that exact time, less than an hour ago. And Lee, the only thing I have, I'm not the meteorologist, but there was a 500-foot ceiling. It was a 54-story building that's connected, I assume, right?
Yeah, there's no question about it, Bill. I mean, number one, we were in instrument flight rules in that particular situation. We heard from Shannon Sohn earlier. You know, a half-mile visibility, they can deal with that, but the 500-foot ceiling, she suggested that a 1,500-foot ceiling was really kind of the limit, where they would have the safe visibility from river to river to be able to navigate if there was any problem. So to note that there was a 500-foot ceiling at the time, you wonder what that helicopter was doing there. Now, in terms of the winds, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just got this handed to me again, and we apologize to the audience because we get information. We want to get it out as fast as possible. They believe that that person died was the pilot, and we're learning now, and you're asking what was he doing up there, that helicopter actually lost contact with LaGuardia Tower at some point, indicating that something bad had happened on that chopper moments before it came down on top of that building.
And our producer Brian's telling me that the woman who was an eyewitness is on the phone. Lee, stand by for a second. We want to get to this eyewitness. Ma'am, can you hear us? It's Bill Ritter with Dave Navarro.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Thank you, thank you. Tell us what you saw and where were you?
I was inside the building. I work inside the building. And we felt a little bit of a shook. I think people on higher floors could hear a noise. But it was kind of weird, not like a minor earthquake, not kind of like anything I've ever felt before. And we waited a couple minutes, kind of figuring out what to do. And before getting a formal notification from security, which came a couple of minutes later, the building just decided to evacuate.
What floor are you on, and how tall is this building?
I think the building, I don't actually know how many floors my building is, but it's 54.
54. And what floor were you on?
I was on the 30th floor.
Okay, so somewhere in between, but close enough to feel that shake in the building.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I moved in my seat. Yeah, but I think the whole building has been evacuated from my understanding. Yeah. Everybody in the building is fine.
And where is everybody?
Our building has a very comprehensive safety plan, so people go to different evacuation points. Right. A couple people went to some hotel lobbies in the neighborhood, restaurants, places that were opening their doors to pedestrian traffic, I guess. And as far as I know, nobody's really going back to work for the rest of the day.
I have to ask you on a personal note, and knowing what you know so far, what's your reflection on what's occurred?
I mean, it's a really, really unfortunate incident. I think New Yorkers, especially New Yorkers that have lived here and experienced 9/11, do get a little bit of post-traumatic stress from events like this. I think being in a stairwell, walking down the stairs with a little bit of panic really can freak some people out. So it's definitely like a memory that is sitting with the citizens of the city. Fortunately, this event was nothing like that today, but I think, the city reacts with that kind of in mind, and that definitely informs the reflex.
Yeah, of course. And what did you feel like when you were walking down those stairs?
A little bit panicked. Sorry. I'm near an ambulance.
No, it's quite all right. We understand.
Yeah. But no, fortunately, everybody is okay. I think you try not to, or at least I try not to think of the worst scenario.
Was it yeah, I'm sorry.
No. What were you about to ask?
Well, I was going to ask, when you, as you were leaving the building, were firefighters coming up the building at that point? Is anyone informing you as to what was going on and that it was a helicopter on top of the building?
All I saw was NYPD. I actually saw that it was a helicopter through Twitter. As soon as the building shook, everybody was like Googling Midtown explosion, Midtown earthquake, seeing like what was the latest headline.
Right.
And nothing came up, but the soonest thing I got was Twitter.
Right.
Wow. So where is everyone just down on the street waiting there? What are they doing?
I think people are dispersing and going home, including myself.
Of course. And so you're in the Equitable building. We know that's 54 stories. You felt the shake of the whole thing. We don't know for sure what happened, but if that pilot, he's not supposed to be there, but if he had troubles, he crash landed on top of your building, and thankfully, smartly, found a flat area to land on, to crash land on, and not have any possibility of the danger of him crashing onto the street or into the side of a building, which would have been a very different story than we're talking about right now.
Yep, and thankfully that's not the case. So I hope that pilot is okay.
Okay, you've asked not to use your name in public, so we won't. But thank you very much, ma'am. We really appreciate it, and I hope that you get over any PTSD you're worried about.
Oh no, yeah. Calm New Yorkers down. That's your job.
Okay.
Thank you
very much.
so much. Let's go to Sandra Bookman, Eyewitness News reporter Sandra Bookman. We've reestablished our contact with her. Get a sense of the situation from where she's located. Sandra, where are you right now, and what can you tell us?
Yeah. David, I am about a block from where Michelle Charlesworth and her crew are. We're at 51st and 7th Avenue. We are standing directly in front of the AXA Equitable building. I'm going to step out of the way. I would describe the scene right now as kind of controlled chaos. The FDNY, NYPD, they definitely have this under control as they search for answers. What you've got now is a mix of reporters, journalists, photographers, also people who are in this area, tourists, office workers that work in the area, all of them here trying to figure out exactly what happened. I think you got to look at the top of this building just a few minutes ago on this shot. Right now, it is still shrouded in fog. Perhaps that had something to do with why the pilot was forced to make this forced landing on top of the building. I think you reported earlier one person dead. At this point, it appears that pilot may have been the only person on the chopper. Again, we are waiting for specific information about where the chopper came from and why it was he had to land on top of this building. I heard the lady just a few minutes ago, that worker from the building, talking on the phone about feeling it shake and then coming down the stairs. Obviously, anybody who lives in New York City, it is reminiscent of what a lot of people suffered through on September 11th, which seems like a long time ago, but not really that long ago if you were in the city. And I think the response this afternoon, if you hear about a chopper on a building or into a building, everybody comes out because we want to make sure that we're not seeing something happen again. Coming over here, traffic is a nightmare. So if you are even thinking about coming into the Midtown area, even if you're coming by train, I'd say stay away. Emergency vehicles were coming into the area using the bike lanes to get here because that's the only way they could get through traffic. Right now, most of the streets around 51st and 52nd are blocked off, so traffic is is being redirected. Again, one person dead. We don't have a camera on the top of the roof now, so we haven't gotten a look at the chopper, and we're waiting for some additional information. I think the governor mentioned earlier, the good thing is the fire seemed to be contained to the chopper, and so while people in the building felt it and were evacuated, it doesn't appear anyone else was injured. David, Bill?
All right, Sandra, thank you. It doesn't appear, and we just got confirmation from federal
Guys, if
sources.
you're talking to me,
Yes, no, sorry. We just got federal, that was Sandra Bookman reporting from the scene near Michelle Charlesworth, that we got confirmation from federal sources who are officials telling ABC News now that no one was hurt on the ground, no one else was hurt on the helicopter, just the pilot. And he was, of course, killed, which, David, I think gives credence to some of the things you and I were talking about with former FDNY Commissioner Tom Von Essen, that this guy was in trouble. He found a place to land, even though it was not legal to be there, but that mattered not at that point. And he found the nearest high, flat building to land on and crash landed on that building. And thank heaven he did.
Yeah, no, it's clear that there was some trouble on that helicopter. That's what the information we're getting right now. In fact, he was in contact with LaGuardia Tower, and he lost contact just before this helicopter went down on top of this building that's 50-plus towers, 50-plus stories above. Important to notice that the governor, and you heard Sandra Bookman talk about the governor moments ago, and he said no indication of terrorism. Let's take you to the quickie interview that he had a chance to do with some of the reporters on the scene, and let's listen in.
If you're a New Yorker, you have a level of PTSD, right, from 9/11. And I remember that morning all too well. So as soon as you hear an aircraft hit a building, I think my mind goes where every New Yorker's mind goes.
But at this point, there's no indication that
at this point there is no indication that is. The only indication was a helicopter had to do an emergency or a hard landing or crashed onto the rooftop of the building, causing a fire. But there's no indication of anything more than that. Again, this is all very preliminary, and these situations evolve very quickly, as we know. But that's all we know.
So that's Governor Cuomo talking a few minutes ago. And David, interesting, he brought up the question of PTSD, and that's exactly what our eyewitness, as she was leaving the 30th floor.
How could you not?
How could you not?
You feel the building shake. Word starts to spread that an aircraft of some sort, initially we didn't know what it was, but now you learn it was a helicopter, and you can't help but wonder what the motives was. But everything is pointing now is that there was some kind of problem on that helicopter, because we know from the early reporting of this, the tower lost contact with the pilot on top of and he was running into trouble. There seems to be some indication, still too early to tell if pilot error was involved or not, but there was an issue going on, and there is no helipad in the city. He was not meant to land on top of this building. He did it for whatever reason, and it has been contained pretty much at this point. He died in the process, it looks like, but the fire that was there is mostly extinguished. We have a team of reporters who have been covering this for us. Why don't we go back to Michelle Charlesworth right now and get the latest from her outside the building. Michelle.
So just to give you bearings, again, I'm at between the 51st and 52nd Street, 7th Avenue side, across from the Equitable Building. Let me show you, as we look up, we couldn't see before. You can see how terrible visibility is here as we look at the top of this high-rise. This, again, is the Equitable Building at 787 7th Avenue. We're across from, we're actually standing on the sidewalk at the Manhattan at Times Square Hotel, if you're familiar with that, between 51st and 52nd. Hearing the news down here on the ground, folks heard the news very quickly that it was the pilot who was killed making this crash landing around 2 o'clock on the rooftop here, apparently having to ditch out for whatever reason after losing contact with LaGuardia. Again, around 2 o'clock. It is, I will echo what Sandra was saying, it is a nightmare getting here. All the streets are closed. We got in just before everything closed down. Let's take a look down here on the ground. Press Corps here, New York Press Corps, international reporters. We have first responders, EMS, 15 fire trucks, the entire sidewalk filled with first responders, people ready in case anyone might have been hurt. Thank goodness the news spreading, and we now know no one on the ground hurt, no one in the building hurt. I did talk to a gentleman who, just like your eyewitness caller, felt that shake when this helicopter crash landed on the roof here at 787 7th Avenue. So nobody knew what it was, and then all of a sudden there was this call to get out of the building, and one can imagine. I'm glad the governor went there and we didn't have to. It is terrifying to hear that kind of a situation, and we all feel it, and we all felt it driving here. But good to hear that people on the ground and people in the building were not hurt. Very sad to hear that this pilot, for whatever reason, was killed crash landing on the roof of this building behind me. I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Michelle, thanks. You just mentioned Governor Cuomo on the scene. We just got this tweet from President Trump. He tweeted, "I've been briefed on the helicopter crash in New York City. Phenomenal job by our great first responders who are currently on the scene. Thank you for all you do, 24/7, 365. The Trump administration stands ready should you need anything at all."
Wow. The White House informing the president within the last half hour of this accident. Helicopters within a mile of this area, banned, of course, since November 2016, when Donald Trump was elected president, because of Trump Tower. That is now a air-free zone. And as David said earlier, since 1997 in the old Pan Am building, now MetLife building, that was a fatal crash in May 1977. 5 people were killed. Since then, no more landing pads on top of high-rises in New York.
And speaking of riding in a helicopter, piloting a helicopter, we have our helicopter reporter, Shannon Sohn, on the line with us. And Shannon, we've had, since we first talked, we've learned so much more. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Yeah, you know, I'm listening to everything that's being said, and I'm sort of getting information on my side as well. You know, the pilots are talking, and we're monitoring some of the frequencies. But a couple of things that need to be considered with this. Obviously, weather is going to play a factor in this investigation. Whether or not weather had something to do with the crash, it is definitely going to be a factor today. There are 3 things that could have happened. There could have been a mechanical problem with the helicopter. We are getting word on our side, it is not confirmed yet, but we are getting word that this was an Augusta aircraft, which would be a twin-engine aircraft. So the options that we have are a mechanical problem, pilot error, or something weather-related at this point, and those are the things that the FAA is going to be looking into. One of the things that needs to be pointed out is that since we have President Trump in office, there is a 1-mile TFR, a temporary flight restriction, around the Trump Tower where he is located, whether he's there or not. Even in Newscopter 7, you'll notice sometimes when we're doing stories that are in the Midtown area, we're looking at them from a distance because you can't go within a mile of that building.
Right.
This crash happened within the confines of that TFR.
Yep. Right. Well, does it indicate at all? I mean, the fact that this helicopter landed on the building, does it indicate to you and to the pilots there that he actively, I'm saying he, it could be a she, that the pilot actively landed that aircraft in an effort to prevent it from hitting the street possibly below? I mean, even if it's a restricted airspace, if we're going to assume that there was some kind of mechanical problem or even pilot or even weather, he still managed to put that helicopter on top, or she, on top of a building.
He absolutely did, but the other side of that is that it could indicate that there was spatial disorientation because of the soupy weather, for lack of the
So it could have been luck
term.
that they landed on top of the building then.
Not even so much luck as that's where they popped out, and that's where they were able to make some sort of a landing. Keep in mind that we were flying back in Brooklyn in 2004 when one of the news helicopters, Chopper 4, crashed into a building in Brooklyn, and I had the chance after that to speak to the pilot, and there was an investigation into that as well. But he did have forward thought. He had lost control of the aircraft. There was a mechanical problem with it, and despite having lost control of the situation, that was what was on his mind, was trying to get it onto the top of a rooftop to prevent further injury. So I think as pilots, they're always thinking about that and always thinking about the safest way to land, but that exactly is one of the reasons that we are not flying today, because when you're over the city and we have 500-foot ceilings, which is what was being reported at LaGuardia at the time that this incident happened, you don't have enough altitude that if you have an issue with the helicopter that you're going to be able to make it to either river to keep people safe. So your only option is really to put it on a rooftop. And if you are having a mechanical problem, or you're stuck in weather and you're disoriented, or you're having a pilot error, the last thing you're thinking about is whether where you are landing is legal. You're thinking about how do I get this in the safest way somewhere. So not necessarily on the ground, in this case, a building top.
So you're not flying, Shannon. The ceiling is 500 feet. It was an hour ago anyway. What does that mean for other helicopters? I mean, you don't fly because it's dangerous to fly. Are you prohibited from flying? Can other helicopters still fly?
Yeah, so there are instrument flight rules that apply. So we look at we call it the aero weather, and we look at the reports, and right now it is IFR. We do not fly in IFR conditions, and what IFR means is instrument flight rules. So they can file an instrument flight plan and fly safely in this weather. Whether or not this aircraft actually filed an instrument flight plan is in question. We're not quite sure what the tail number is on the aircraft, so it's hard for us to track where this helicopter started and where it was going to. But from initial reports that we're hearing, and again, this is initial reports. This is not confirmed. But if it wasn't a Augusta, it was a twin-engine aircraft, which means that the pilot would be instrument rated. He does have the ability to read the instruments. Whether or not he filed that flight plan is what is in question at this point. But obviously, when the weather gets like this, and I've been in an aircraft once back when TWA crashed, and the pilot lost spatial awareness, and it's frightening and it's terrifying, and it can happen so easily, which is why we don't go up in conditions like this personally. Now, every company has different rules, and if you are instrument rated, you can fly safely in weather like this because you have topography and you're able to read the instruments on the aircraft, and theoretically you should be able to block out the fact that you can't really see out the windows and just read the instruments on the aircraft to be able to safely get from point A to point B. But being able to do that and it really working that way in a perfect scenario are two very, very different things. Obviously, something went wrong here, whether it was pilot error, whether it was mechanical, or whether it was weather-related and a disorientation situation. That is what they're going to be investigating. Go ahead.
So Shannon, I want you to stay on and listen to this, and maybe you can weigh in. Lee Goldberg, we had to interrupt him because we had the eyewitness, but he was going through some of the exact same criteria you were talking about, and what was happening with the weather at the exact moment this helicopter went down. And I want you to listen to it. Lee, if you're joining us now, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. We're waiting for your mic to go up.
Go ahead.
We're trying to bring Lee in if that's possible.
Right, and as we wait for that, the FAA just released information that they will be they're gathering information, and as you might imagine, they're going to conduct an investigation as soon as they get more into this.
Of course. Okay, Lee, you're up, and Shannon's listening too because she was just going through, her sort of standard operating procedure. What happens when the ceiling is this low? Go ahead.
Okay, so sort of summarize that. If the control room does want to get off of the live picture briefly to show just sort of a rundown of the conditions midday in Midtown, we've got all those kind of lined up for you. And as Shannon was saying, obviously, we're under instrument flight rules. Half-mile visibility, 500-foot ceiling, and Shannon earlier in the day was talking about 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet being a more comfortable threshold, and the newscopter obviously grounded today. The wind gusts. Now, this is interesting. They were gusting at 20 to 25 miles an hour, but the direction is significant because just given the way of the orientation of Manhattan and the buildings, our direction out of the east-northeast, we always seem to get some of our higher gusts. We're a little bit more vulnerable to those winds than we are from the prevailing west-northwest wind. So when they're coming out of the east-northeast, they tend to be a little bit stronger. Now remember, you're talking about high volume, close proximity of buildings in Midtown. So that's going to funnel the winds in there. So there's going to be all types of eddies in there, and the wind can be swirling a little bit. So even a 20-mile-per-hour gust could be more like 35 when it comes to how maybe a pilot may perceive that. And then, of course, we had moderate rain. So if you're talking about all those together and the worst possible conditions of the day around that time during the midday, that certainly is a challenge to navigate. So I wonder if weather continues to be something that will follow in terms of a potential cause.
Lee, thank you so much for that. Again, as you were talking, more information comes in. I want to read you the entire FAA statement because there's a lot of information in it. The FAA is saying an Augusta A109E helicopter, and I'm hoping Shannon Sohn is on the line still listening to this, an Augusta A109E helicopter crashed on at about 1:45 p.m. Preliminary information is that only the pilot was aboard. FAA air traffic controllers did not handle the flight. The NTSB will be in charge of the investigation and will determine probable cause of the accident. We will release the aircraft registration after New York City officials will release the pilot's name, and we'll continue to tweet updates. Shannon, were you listening? Did you hear any of that?
I did hear that, and that's exactly the information that I was getting in Augusta 109 was the aircraft that I had as well. What was interesting about that was you said that air traffic control was not handling that flight.
Right. What does that mean?
That's interesting to me because that is within the confines of the Class B airspace. That is inside controlled airspace where this crash happened. And as I had mentioned to you, not only is it in the controlled airspace that would be handled by LaGuardia at that point, that is within the confines of that temporary flight restriction that goes for a mile around Trump Tower. So that's interesting that sort of points more towards a disorientation situation.
Is it possible to be a pilot in this and actually, let's say, be outside the restricted area and get caught in a cloud bank and the next thing you know, you're in Midtown?
That would be really hard to do in this area because there's so much controlled airspace in this vicinity. We've been flying, and you may not know this, and the people at home may not know this, but when we're flying in Newscopter 7, the pilots are listening to our frequencies when we're talking to you guys. And likewise, we're listening to the pilot frequencies and we're listening to the towers. The reason being that we can help each other out.
Yeah,
and
sure, of course.
If traffic is pointed out to us and the pilot doesn't see it, we can point it out to the pilot. It just makes good sense. And there are aircraft that will come down, especially the Hudson River, and not realize that they're in controlled airspace. But the towers get in touch with them very, very quickly, and there are ways for them to get in touch with them. It's hard to be in this area because above the controlled airspace that the towers use for helicopters and aircraft transitioning through, it's where the towers are handling the planes that are actually landing.
Right.
So it's hard to not be with a tower when you're in this area, especially between LaGuardia and Kennedy.
So Sandra, Shannon, we're getting new information. I'm going to ask you to stay on the line and let us get back to you as we get more information about this pilot. We do have some new information we want to tell you about, but first we have another eyewitness that Sandra Bookman has on the ground, and we want to hear from that eyewitness as well. Sandra?
Yeah, that's right, Bill. I am standing here with Nathan Hutton, who works for B&P Bank. He was inside the building when all of this happened. Nathan, what floor were you on?
I was on the 29th floor.
And when did you know something was wrong?
We were all in my IT division. We were on the 29th floor. Basically, it was about 1:35 or so. We were all sitting around talking, doing our work, and we kind of felt the whole floor kind of like shake. And it felt like someone was standing next to you and kind of like just gave you a hard shove. And basically we all felt it and we're like, okay, that was kind of different. So it's like we didn't think a whole lot more of it. But then again, our head of security came in and said, there has been an incident. Go ahead and grab what you need, get up and get off the floor.
And how did you guys start to exit?
Basically, we all went for the staircases. We all made sure that all of our team members all of us were accounted for, and we all started to head for the staircases. About 2 minutes after that, that was when the alarms went off, and then we heard over the loudspeaker, there has been an incident. Everyone, please evacuate the building. At that point, we know this was something serious. Everybody leave now.
So when you got into the staircase, you were describing that. Tell me what that felt like, what was going on.
I am on the 29th floor. Last summer, for fun, seeing how long it would take me to get downstairs from the top floor, from the 29th floor down to the first. 2.5 to 3 minutes, I could run it. Today, I looked at my watch because I wanted a time, how long it would take. It was 1:35. All people from all the floors were all trying to come down the staircases at the same time.
So did you smell smoke? Were you frightened? Were you nervous?
Well, you could come down. It was about 20 minutes. No, I'm sorry, about 10 minutes to 2 o'clock when I basically thought everybody's calm, but now they're getting a little bit nervous, a little bit antsy. People were saying, come on, let's kind of pick up the pace. That point, there was a smell because the whole staircase was like one big air vent. You could smell the smell of smoke coming down from the upper floor, and it smelled like a smell of burnt construction material.
Did anybody start to panic?
That was when they got just a little bit nervous and like, hey, wow, everybody, let's kind of pick up the pace, let's kind of move, but everybody stayed calm. We had no idea what happened until we got down to the first floor. And then we were told, everybody get out of the building, get out now.
So looking back on this now, you've had a chance to take a deep breath. Just what are you thinking about how things were handled and getting out of the building and finding out that the pilot was the only one who died in this accident?
Well, that was what I said, is that the pilot probably knew that he couldn't get back to his airport, so he was trying to find the flattest, tallest place that he could land, because you have got a lot of other buildings
But how
here.
are you feeling right now, Nathan?
Well, I feel right now I am relaxed, and I'm glad everybody else is all right, but I'd have to give it to the pilot because the man did do the right thing.
Okay.
But me, I'm fine.
Well, Nathan, we are glad that you got out of the building, and I know it had to be a frightening experience. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. And I think we've heard other people tell similar stories, feeling that building shake, coming down those stairs, having that smell of smoke, and just happy that they were able to get out of the building okay. Of course, everybody upset to hear that the pilot died, but they're happy that no one else was injured. Bill, David, back to you.
Thank you, Sandra. It's still an ongoing situation. You know, this is reportable from police and fire officials at this time. We're told fuel is leaking from the rooftop where that helicopter crashed, so their priority right now is containing it before it goes onto all parts of the building and on the street below. And they're telling us right now that helicopter, and this is in the words we're getting from the people who are there, obliterated. And that's so bad that they can't get to the dead pilot's remains. There's just wreckage there. They have not been able to extricate him yet. The extensive damage is making it difficult to work in that situation. Plan is to evacuate the building, conduct a structural integrity test as well.
And that's the key, structural integrity test. What happens to that roof when a big helicopter like that crash lands on it? We have a reporter here, our investigative reporter, Jim Hoffer, who's no stranger to safety investigations in Midtown. Jim, tell us what's going to happen now. What is the NTSB going to do? What does the city have to do for the buildings? The Department of Buildings will be involved, et cetera.
Well, you can bet on that. I mean, NTSB is probably on its way. Don't know for sure, but you know,
they've already told us.
There you go. So yeah, no, they're definitely on it. Of course, DOB will have to check for the structural integrity of the building, which is probably fine. He crashed on the rooftop, but that's probably the strongest part of the building because that's where all the HVAC equipment is. But one thing that I wanted to note that I just got off the phone with an air traffic controller who has been a source for decades for me, a very level-headed guy, really resourceful, really knows the airspace here in and around Manhattan and the greater metro area. And he is, I mean, I have to tell you, he is just baffled as to why this helicopter was in this airspace on a day like today when the ceiling was only between 300 and 500. He says, I can't imagine why this helicopter would have been, almost 800 feet up in the air on a day when it's just thick, heavy fog and mist and clouds. The only thing he said he can surmise is that he may have been in clear airspace and that it just rapidly closed in on him, the clouds, and that he just got trapped. But as you know, he was also technically in violation of the temporary flight restriction that is a mile radius around Trump Tower.
But if he were in trouble and he were trying, that's the flip side of this, and we don't know, of course, we're just wondering, and these are legitimate questions for us to wonder about. If he were in trouble, if there were some sort of mechanical trouble, and he wanted to get to a flat space instead of crashing into Midtown Manhattan on the ground, he did the right thing.
But the question is, whether there's mechanical problems or not, why in God's name was he even in this airspace on a day like this?
We asked that to Shannon. She says they don't fly when it's 500 feet.
Yeah.
Right.
But they can use instrument flight rules, and they are in effect then.
Yeah.
And so he can do that.
Air traffic controllers were not part of this. This pilot was on his own at this point. And for whatever reason,
they lost
whatever was happening.
They lost communications.
Well, if he were using instrument flight rules, he should have been, by regulation, in touch with LaGuardia Airport.
Right.
This is their airspace.
Is saying FAA air traffic controllers did not handle the flight.
Well, that is Midtown.
But that's the sentence.
Yep.
But you said earlier that he was not in communication with them.
The early reports, you're absolutely right. The early reports we had gotten was that he was not in communication with LaGuardia, or that he had lost communication, indicating that there had been some conversation.
Now,
that may be in question based on this FAA statement. This FAA statement, and it's hard to tell, as you point out, were they ever in control of the flight? I don't know. But they're saying here, the NTS, it says the air traffic controllers did not handle the flight. That, I assume, means from the beginning they were not handling the flight, just from this FAA statement.
So
certainly we have questions.
A big mystery as to what happened, why this guy was flying. If he was flying, did he get into trouble, or is something else at play here? We just don't know. And what the statement David read from federal and local officials, that the bird is badly mangled, the body is still inside. It's going to be a while before people get up there to get him out and extricate him from there and figure this out. And we don't know for now. And we're not speculating, ladies and gentlemen. We are asking questions that I'm sure you are asking at home. These are logical questions. What the heck was this guy doing up there? Did he run into problems that he didn't expect? Why wasn't he in communication with the tower? Did he ever have communication with the FAA tower? We don't know. But, you know, Jim raising some good questions, and so is David. I think these are legitimate questions for us to ask.
And Jim, you've dealt with structural integrity issues in many stories that you covered. Why don't you run us through what goes on in a situation like this?
Well, I mean, they'll have inspectors. If they're not up there now, they soon will be once, you know, there's no longer any kind of hazard. But they'll go on there. These are some of the best in the business. They've done this a lot. They do it for a living. They'll go up there, the engineers, the inspectors, and they'll just make sure that everything is okay so that the public can re-enter the building.
You know, the weather, it just appears to be such a part of this story. Why don't we go back to Lee Goldberg and hear more on what he's been tracking for us. Jim, thanks so much. Lee, what do you have?
You know, something, just looking at everybody's been talking about the half-mile visibility, and just something I looked at, there were a couple of special reports. At 1:50 p.m., the visibility was at 1.25 miles, and then at 1.25 miles, and it went to a half mile a little after 1 o'clock. That was also, that corresponded to a period of heavy rain. So it went from moderate to heavy rain during that time period, and also from 1.25 miles down to a half mile. And, you know, Jim was just alluding to the fact that, you know, did it get caught in the clouds just coming in a hurry? So clearly, the rain intensity and the visibility also got worse in a very short time period, right around that 2 o'clock hour.
Can you go do those times again, exact times? So I want to write these down again differently than I did.
Okay, so at 1:50 in the afternoon, the visibility is at 1.25 miles with moderate rainfall. By 1:07, it's heavy rainfall. By 1:07, it's heavy rainfall, and visibility is down to a half mile. And I would assume also
Lee, I think you meant to say 12:50.
12:50, right?
Right? Not what you're saying 1:50. You're saying your initial time check is at 12:50, correct?
Or 1:50. You said 1:50 visibility, 1.25 miles.
Is it my understanding, just clarify the crash time to me.
About 1:45.
Right, so exactly. So what I'm saying is in terms of our weather observations, at 1:50, we have a visibility of 1.25 miles, and again, these observations done kind of roughly around that time period. I'm saying in that 20-minute time period, a rain band goes from moderate to heavy, and the visibility goes down from 1.25 miles to a half mile. So you've got a drop in visibility and an increase in rainfall during the time of the crash.
Got it. So 2:05, not 1:05. So 1:50, a half mile and a quarter, and then 2:05, a half a mile. That's a significant lack of visibility.
Right.
And the guy could have very easily just run into that and not anticipated that. He doesn't have Lee Goldberg in his ear, obviously, talking about it. It's still the question that David raises, you know, when did this guy lose communication with the control tower, or did he never have it? That's a very big question. But you've solved some of the visibility mystery, that all of a sudden his visibility gets cut by more than half.
And the FAA official just told ABC News that this pilot, it appears, was operating under visual flight rules, flying under those rules and regulations usually reserved for weather conditions in which the pilot can see where they are going. Clearly, you can't see where you're going in Midtown Manhattan, regardless of what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a lot of trouble. And it's based on the principle of see and avoid is basically how the pilots deal with it.
Lee, thank you for doing this. I know you're busy with so many other things, but this has been invaluable to actually see the timeline of this at 1:50 to have 1.25 miles visibility and suddenly a half a mile with a 500-foot ceiling.
Yeah, we'll continue to dig into it.
I want to clarify, because earlier we had heard that possibly the pilot had been at some point in contact with air traffic control. Now we're being told from the FAA he was not in touch with air traffic control. They're being very definitive on that. This man was, this pilot, the man or woman that was piloting this aircraft, was never in touch with the air traffic control
and
flying under VFR conditions.
Yeah, is Shannon still on the line? Control room producers, do we have Shannon Sohn still there?
I'm still here if you guys can hear me.
Hang up for 1 second. Shannon, do you hear us? Did you hear what David
Yes,
just reported about the FAA saying it was never, this guy was never in a communication with the FAA tower?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you say that because we're doing some research on our end as well, and we're listening to the ATC tapes, and we have yet to find this aircraft on the ATC tape, which is the air traffic control tape. So that jives with what I'm hearing. But I also just saw a video of this helicopter moments before it crashed, and I can tell you that looking at the conditions to confirm what Lee was saying, you can see a rapid drop in the cloud cover, but one of the things that's very, very noticeable is that he is all over the sky. You see him drop down out of the clouds, regain control, and go back up into the clouds.
Could you send us that video right away, Shannon, please? Is that possible?
Yes, I can get that video to you. In fact, I will do that as soon as I can.
Okay.
But that was something that I saw on Twitter. So just to keep that in mind, when I see something like that, it points to weather being an issue here. If he was not in communication with the towers and he was trying to get in and out of the clouds and managed to clear the clouds and then wind up back in them, again, there has to be an investigation into this. But looking at something like that and knowing that he wasn't supposed to be where he was, that he flew into a temporary flight restriction, that is known. I mean, it's been in place since President Trump took the presidency. A lot of things went wrong with this flight, but it looks like weather is going to be
Shannon,
a major call.
Could you just go over that one more time? I want to hear your view of what you witnessed in that video. Describe it for us again.
Right, so we were looking at video that we found online, so I will send that to you guys. But you see the helicopter, first you see it in the clouds and descending rapidly out of the clouds. It almost looks like there's a problem with the helicopter. That's how fast it's coming out of the clouds, and then it levels off and then flies back up into the clouds as it comes over the city. So when you see something like that, it makes you think that the pilot may have been disoriented. Again, we do not know what went wrong there, but seeing him descend rapidly out of the clouds and then level off and then go back up into the clouds, we've been there and we've seen it, and it's very easy. Pilots are trained for this, but it is extremely easy to get disoriented. But if you couple that video with the fact that he was not in communication with the towers, it makes you wonder if he in fact knew where he even was.
Wow.
And the fact that you're telling us that the helicopter was basically obliterated, that there's really nothing left, also sort of tells me that maybe it wasn't so intentional to try and get onto that rooftop. That just might have been where he popped out of the clouds.
It could have been just by luck that he did crash into that. We don't know yet.
Shannon, thank you so much for analyzing this. We're going to ask you to stay on and listen to our coverage. Just a recap, at 3:25 almost, about an hour and a half ago, one person was on board a helicopter, the pilot, when it crash landed on top of the Equitable Building on 7th Avenue between 51st and 52nd Street. That was about an hour and a half ago. Only one person was on board. He or she died. The vessel, we understand, is obliterated. Wonderfully, no one was hurt inside the buildings, which were evacuated, or on the street. The pilot, as you heard Shannon talk about and heard Lee talk about just a moments ago, the visibility went down dramatically. Video that Shannon has seen of this helicopter moments before appears to signal that he got lost and didn't know where he was. We don't have answers to all of our questions, the same as you have. One question before we throw to Stefan Kim. General Hospital, to those wanting to watch General Hospital, it will air, I promise, tomorrow morning, 1:37 a.m. right here on Channel 7, and will be on ABC.com as well tomorrow. You will not miss your edition.
Stefan Kim on the scene. Stefan, where are you? What do you know?
Well, David, I'm on 51st and 7th Avenue. The building you can see is behind us, and as you can tell, the NYPD has expanded the perimeter. You heard from Nathan a moment ago, who was a worker in the building on the 29th floor. He described feeling what felt like, he says in his words, like somebody shoved him, and as they evacuated down the stairs, over half an hour it took, smoke had filled that staircase. Now, we have a gentleman here named Prince who wasn't in that building, but happens to live across the street from the building, so he's very familiar with it. Prince, where were you when this happened? You got an alert on your phone, you said, correct?
Yes, I was 100 feet away from my home, which is just across the crash site, and I got a text message, a helicopter crashed next to your home, and so I ran back because I wanted to get my documents and my laptop for work. And you know, there's no way to go back home. The neighborhood got evacuated. We are talking about one of the most densely populated areas of the planet. We have hotels all around. There are 5 hotels just around this AXA tower. And the tower itself has an insurance company, has a bank, has the fanciest restaurant of Manhattan in there. I personally saw the Dalai Lama go in and out, dine at this restaurant, Le Bernardin. And I mean, it's such a sad and scary moment when you hear that.
Through your mind when you got that alert?
I got goosebumps and chisels, and at the very first moment you just think of like, can you go back? Can I just get a few of my belongings out? I went actually towards the crash site because I just wanted to get some things out of my home. So
you weren't able to go inside, but describe to us what you saw when you did arrive at this corner.
When I arrived at our street, which is 51st Street, between 6th and 7th Avenue, we're in the heart of the theater district. All of a sudden it was shut down. People were blocked by the police. A lot of police was around, and interestingly enough, it became very quiet. So I feel when New Yorkers are in a state of emergency, they just want to help and figure out what's going on. Then the firefighters arrived, and pretty much they locked this entire area. Nobody can go back to their work, back to their homes. And the first information we got, it is a crash. It was an emergency because of the weather. So it is not an act of terror. And that was kind of the biggest relief, that it is not an act of terror. And I heard that unfortunately the pilot passed away. He died in the crash, which is the most sad thing, and prayers to his family.
Before you heard it was not an act of terror, was that something that was a concern for you?
It was the biggest concern. Why would all of a sudden a helicopter crash in Midtown Manhattan? We haven't seen that. I mean, all these bad memories came back up when New York was hit so badly and struck by terror. And there was such a huge fear. I mean,
you saw all of these workers evacuated outside. Describe to me what you saw on their faces. What was the mood like?
When I look to the first responders in Manhattan, they are one of a kind. I've never seen anyone being that calm, focused, and pretty much keeping it so professional, even when the unknown is up in the air, literally. This skyscraper is high. The top where the crash site is cannot be even seen. It's up in the clouds. And even under those circumstances, they did their job meticulously. I mean, they couldn't have done it any better. They kept people quiet. They kept the neighborhood safe. They tried to keep people out of this area. And I do not exactly know if this helicopter crashed at the edge of the building. We cannot see it from here, or at the middle. This building is a high-rise tower. It has no helipad. Since I live here for 15 years, I've never seen any helicopter land here or any close to our area. We are at the theater district, just across the Tony Award-winning shows. Then we have all these hotels here. So it's
You're familiar with the building. You lived there for a long time. What do you know about what's on that roof?
I go in and out of this building all the time because they have a cafe in there, they have a restaurant in there, a place I like to frequent, and it's a very busy building. It's a very solid building. It's a building that is completely covered with a marble, front marble stucco all around. So this solid building doesn't seem vulnerable, but history told us better, so you never know what happened. And in this building, an emergency means an escape of thousands of people. It has so many offices, banks, several companies, and it's all very hardworking people who are leaving now.
One last question. You described the first responders. What about all the evacuated workers? What did you see there?
Everyone who was evacuated was in the unknown, in shock, as we didn't know at first what's happening with our workplace, in my case, with our home, with our New York Midtown Manhattan, with our theater district. And the first moment, which was communicated so quick, it was an accident, not an act of terror, gave us a relief. And I already got my first very touching text messages where friends say, do you want to stay over? I hear your neighborhood is in trouble. And this is touching my heart. New York has the biggest heart if something terrible happens.
Okay, thank you, Prince.
Thank you. Thank you.
So obviously, it's not just the one building that this helicopter crashed on. You have neighboring buildings like this residential building, quite a tall building. They're evacuated. They can't get back inside. And this scene, as I mentioned, has been expanding. It looks like the NYPD and the FDNY are trying to get a little control over this intersection. As you can see, there are fire trucks all down 7th Avenue, and they're now pushing us further downtown as we're expecting an official update from the mayor and the governor. but this is 51st and 7th Avenue. Didn't have too much trouble coming across town. 8th Avenue wasn't too bad, but once you hit 7th Avenue, as you can see, no one's moving anywhere. So as soon as we learn more and find more folks who were in that building and have seen running up to the building after this happened, we'll bring you those updates. But one last look here, you're seeing the NYPD. They're putting out barricades now, just setting up an official perimeter, because aside from the media and all of the first responders, you do have quite a few tourists and residents and employees down here who are just trying to figure out what's going on and get around town. So as soon as we figure out more and learn more, we'll bring that to you guys. Back to you guys.
Stefan, let me just tell you that you got in fine, but it now is very different. The NYPD transportation division says pedestrian and vehicular traffic closures in place from 42nd to 57th Streets between 8th and 6th Avenue. So that's a long swath of real estate.
You know, not to mention, so we came from City Hall, Lower Manhattan, and the traffic backed up quite a bit. I mean, we hit traffic probably in the 20s to 30s. So as you can imagine, with gridlock in the city, just because it's not officially closed down doesn't mean doesn't have this tremendous ripple effect. You know, the weather doesn't contribute, as we all know in New York. Once it becomes inclement, it's a little bit tougher getting around town. So we didn't see closures until we tried to cross across town in the 50s. But for certainly the low 20s, the mid 20s, already it was backed up, and we had quite a hard time getting around, getting up here. Now, we're professionals in doing this, but if you're just navigating around town on GPS or on foot or by car, you're not really getting anywhere anytime fast.
Right.
The subway, which is still running from what I understand, is probably the best bet, but more and more, as you can see, these barricades are going down now, and pedestrian traffic is not going to move. It's going to be a frozen zone for quite a few hours, I would imagine, at the very least.
Well, as you know, I think you heard our reports that they're worried about the gas, the fuel that is spilling from the helicopter, the mangled helicopter, above the 54th story on the flat roof of the Equitable building above where you are, and going down. They want to contain that. They don't want people around that and any kind of debris that might fall down. Again, I want to repeat this, and I have a question for you, Stefan. Repeat for anyone who missed that. Midtown is just going to be closed down between 8th and 6th Avenues from 42nd all the way up to 57th Street. So if you don't have to be in there, you're not going to be able to get in there anyway. Just stay away from that area. Stefan, listening to your live witness, I know you talked to other people before you got on our air just now.
Yeah.
Their stories all seem very similar to each other.
Yeah, in fact, Bill, if we have time, I have another person here. You were in the building, sir, you said? So what is your name, sir?
My name is Morgan Aries.
And you were in the building?
Yes, I just want to let you know the FDNY did a great job. When we got to the bottom of the building and got out, there was no confusion about where you needed to go right at that same time. And we got, over 30 floors of people in that building trying to evacuate at the same time. So that's hundreds of people just trying to get out, and there was just escorts of people getting evacuated straight across the street.
Down the stairwell?
Yeah. Well, down the stairwell there was moments where it was a little chaotic because you can imagine 30 floors trying to evacuate at the same time.
Right.
So there was moments where you had to actually stop and wait, and that's when the anxiety started to set in for several people. I started getting a little confused about what exactly had happened.
What did you know at that moment?
Didn't know anything, but a bunch of people were getting on their phones, including myself, to try to check news to see what was going on at the time. We couldn't find anything at the time, except for that there was a steam pipe bust in the East Village. Okay. It wasn't until I got out of the building that I started seeing some Twitter accounts about what had actually happened.
What floor were you on?
I was on the 14th floor, and I felt some minor tremors, but everyone on my floor felt that. I had heard that people on the 22nd floor had felt it a little bit more substantial.
So looking back now, what's going through your mind? Now that you know what happened and all the response was there, what's going through your mind?
Well, I'm just glad everything worked out the way it did, and that it wasn't a terrorist attack. No one got hurt. Everyone got out on time. It was just unfortunate because I'm trying to go back to work.
Right. Well, thank goodness it was not an act of terror, but was that something that was on your mind at the time?
At the time, I didn't know exactly what's going on. I'm sure a lot of people that experienced 9/11 thought maybe a little different about the situation. For me, I thought it was maybe a fire on one of the floors, maybe like in a kitchen or something. But it wasn't until I got outside the building that I had learned that it was an actual helicopter that hit the building.
Okay, but for the most part, you would describe the evacuation as orderly, or?
Absolutely. I mean, the unfortunate part was just so many people trying to leave at the same time. But as far as once you got out the ground floor and out onto the streets, it was very orderly. It was just conducted very well by the FDNY.
Thank you very much, sir. Glad you're okay.
Thank you.
So, Bill, you mentioned there's some consistency here, right?
Yep.
with the employees who were in the building, they all describe, this pretty orderly but anxious, anxiety-filled, journey down the staircase. I mean, some of these folks were up 30 floors or more. And you can imagine hundreds of people all jammed into a staircase trying to get outside, not really knowing exactly what's going on. Now, this gentleman didn't mention it, but Nathan earlier, who you heard from when Sandra Bookman spoke to him, mentioned that the smoke from the roof was pouring into the staircase. So you can only imagine what that adds to the anxiety. But, same thing we're hearing from a lot of folks here. Once they got outside, they really credit the first response, and they seem to have figured out, once out on the street, where to be, where to go, and what was going on. But those initial moments inside that building, I'm sure a lot of folks didn't know what was going on, and naturally you're going to think back to what happened many years ago. It's a natural thing to think back to, but thank goodness that's not the case here, and we're going to try to find some more workers who are in that building, and we'll bring that to you as soon as we get that.
Well, I appreciate it, and all of our reporters are doing a great job out there talking to people. We're really getting a first-hand account of the fear, and as you say, Stefan, it really is a common thread, and everyone has that same gnawing, anxiety-filled feeling inside them, and we know what happened to people who did not, who were told to stay in a building and not walk down those stairways, and people are not doing that anymore, and that oftentimes is the best thing to do. Stefan, thanks. Keep working what you can on the ground there. I want to go to our colleague, Michelle Charlesworth. She is also on the scene there and talking to people as well. Michelle?
Not a lot of people to talk to, unfortunately, just the press corps, because everybody's been kept back about a block. We are right here in the middle of things, literally across the street from the building. So everyone who was moved out of the building had to move back and away. Very different feeling here from police and fire. The fire trucks have peeled out of here, have left this area. Excuse me, sir. There's a news conference that the NYPD will be having in just a few moments. Let me get out of the way. But first responders, the gurneys are out of here. The ambulances are out of here. Of course, initially when we got here, it was so early. The fear factor was very high. First responders running, trying to keep people safe, keeping the perimeter of the building clear, because they didn't know what might happen. Again, no helipad on top of this high-rise building. This is just a regular high-rise in Manhattan, Midtown, just a few blocks north of Times Square. And what you see going on in front of the hotel here on 51st and 7th Avenue, this is literally straight across from the Equitable building, is a news conference that's being set up by the FDNY, NYPD to give us the very latest. But we know at this point that this one pilot was killed making this crash landing around 2 o'clock this afternoon. And we know why these fire trucks are able to leave and why the ambulances have been able to pack up and go. EMS able to clear the area, because we know nobody was hurt on the ground, nobody in the building. Thank goodness, such a sigh of relief. We're going to bring you this news conference as it happens. Perhaps more word on why this helicopter was in the air, who was flying with no visibility, very little visibility. We are also hearing, someone was saying in LaGuardia, a plane had to make a couple passes because the visibility was so poor. So that's the only anecdotal thing that I've heard here, and that was a tourist trying to get back to their hotel who knew nothing, who had not been evacuated, but just was shocked that they were coming back to. Can you imagine this scene when you're a tourist visiting in New York City? So that's the latest here at 51st and 7th Avenue, literally right across the street from the Equitable building. I tweeted out a picture of the top of the building, just completely, it's as though you erased, I'll show you. The top of the building is just, you can see the cloud cover. And again, no helipad up there. This was just a flat surface on which to bring this down. And unfortunately, that one pilot killed in this crash landing. We're going to come back to you with this news conference in just a little bit. We don't have a time on it yet. I wish I could tell you, but we'll come to you when they're ready.
Right, they're going to do it outside where you are. Is that correct, Michelle? That's where it's going to be?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Let me just.
Yes, on the other side. We have other crews on the other side.
Got it. Let me just say that since Lee Goldberg brought us, and I don't know if you heard our coverage or not, but he really did outline. He and Shannon were doing a combo team analysis of what the visibility was, and Lee said that at 150 there was a 1.25 mile visibility. A half hour before that there was nearly 2 miles of visibility, and at 2:05, right after the chopper crashed, there was a 0.5 mile of visibility. So this visibility level just went to nothing. to nothing in about a half hour worth of time.
Wow.
So that's just an amazing stat to think about. Michelle, thank you. Speaking, as Michelle said, there's going to be a press conference, a news conference with the mayor, Fire Commissioner O'Neill, and Fire Commissioner Dan Nigro, and Police Commissioner Jimmy O'Neill. And this is a meeting, a picture of a meeting. We just got this into our Eyewitness newsroom of them talking to each other before holding that press conference, and we are going to bring that to you as soon as we get it. Let me just say one more thing. For those of you expecting to see General Hospital right now, obviously this helicopter crash landing or crash on top of the Equitable building on 7th Avenue and 51st, between 51st and 52nd Street, taking precedent. The pilot confirmed dead. There is some fuel apparently leaking. That's why the area has been cleared. They want to seal that fuel off, clean it up before anyone is exposed to that. General Hospital will be aired on our station, Channel 7, tomorrow morning at 1:37 a.m. The football game may change that a few minutes, but that's our intent. And in addition, all day tomorrow at ABC.com, you can watch General Hospital. Sandra Bookman, also on the scene. She talked to one of the eyewitnesses, has some new information, or talking to new people. Sandra?
Yeah, Bill, you heard him just a little while ago talking about feeling the building shake, apparently, when that chopper landed on the roof, being told over the loudspeaker that they should get their belongings, walk down the stairs, going into the stairways, starting to smell some smoke, getting a little bit antsy because things seem to be moving slowly, but getting out of the building okay. Everyone a little bit shaken up, a little scary when you hear about a plane or a chopper crash landing on your building, but glad that everyone did get out okay. Of course, over the last hour or so, we have been hearing that there is a possible gas leak from the chopper. The FDNY right now working on that. You know, when something like this happens in New York, it's all hands on deck. I'm going to step out of the way a little bit. Even with some of the video you've seen from the scene, you notice that not as many fire trucks on the scene, not as much personnel. Again, this is still a very active scene. They are still working it, presumably up on that roof, trying to secure that possible leak. But certainly the number of fire trucks, the number of personnel, the number of other emergency vehicles greatly diminished as the department has gotten this situation under control. I heard Michelle mention it, that a lot of tourists in this area. After all, this is Midtown Manhattan. Honestly, it's got to be one of the most documented events to happen in the city because everybody's got their cell phone out and they don't need to watch General Hospital or another drama because it's been playing out right on top of them. That's, in fact, one of the struggles for police and fire here when you get a scene like this is you got to keep the tourist out and try to let the journalist in and just really keep order in general. The advice you heard from Stefan, the advice you guys have been giving in the studio, if you do not have to come into Midtown today, stay out. The city really is, this area anyway, shut down. I think Bill said from 42nd Street to 57th Street. This block, 7th Avenue, between 51 and 52, obviously, it's all full of emergency vehicles. You walk one block over to Broadway and it is absolutely clear because you can start to see the impact of shutting the street down. Some of that, of course, because of the general emergency here, but also because of concerns about whatever fuel may be leaking from that chopper. Michelle pointed out we're waiting for a news conference to start here. We're hoping to get much more information, you know, perhaps what that pilot was doing in the air on a day like this and what led him to make that hard landing on top of the building. Bill, David?
Yes, and I should reiterate, you made the point, we do not know how long this wide swath of Midtown between 6th and 8th Avenues and between 42nd and 57th Street, we don't know how long that's going to remain closed, but as you said, Sandra, it is closed right now. Sandra Bookman on the scene for us as well today. Sandra, thank you. I want to clarify a comment I made a few minutes ago about when General Hospital will air. It will be after the basketball finals. For some reason, Mr. Sports here, I said football, and of course they're not playing football yet, but that's going to happen. We are on this, and we're going to stay on this until Eyewitness News at 4, which will, with Dave and Liz Cho, and they're going to bring you the latest. But we think this is an important enough story, given what could have happened, given what did happen, happen, and given what's happening right now with such a large swath of Midtown now completely shut down. I'm going to ask our control room if you can get Shannon Sohn back on the phone, because I want to bring in Lee Goldberg and tell us a little more about, he's gone back in time a little bit and shown us how exactly, what's happened to the visibility between all this time, and it really did decrease, Lee, faster than you even said at the beginning of this coverage. Lee, you're there?
Hi, Bill. Yeah, I'm here. You know, the visibility actually right now in New York City is up to 3 miles. But
there you go.
There was a dramatic change during that time period that pilot encountered. Now, as we've talked to Shannon and all the other pilots, aviation experts, you're talking about this is an instrument fly rule day, obviously. And what we may know is that he was flying under visual flight rules, which, you know, with this type of situation, you have a half-mile visibility reported around just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But it was that decrease in visibility that we observed. For instance, at 1:27 in the afternoon, the visibility was 1 3/4 miles. So, you know, pushing 2 miles as we approach 1:30 in the afternoon, and by 7 minutes past 2, it was down to half mile.
Wow.
You also had the rain going moderate to heavy during that time. You had a 500-foot ceiling, which of course our own Copter 7 was grounded. It probably went from 600 to 400 during that time period. The east-northeast winds were gusting around 20 miles an hour. Northeast wind, we're most vulnerable to that with some of our higher readings, so the wind was certainly swirling around Midtown. And again, the rain going from moderate to heavy. So, you know, that was just terrible timing. You know, we of course yet to find out whether, you know, weather is the end-all be-all in this, but certainly, you know, when you look back and investigate that 30-40 minute period, the weather was deteriorating in a hurry.
Wow. Shannon, did you hear all that, I hope?
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
I want to bring in, before you say that, I want to bring in one more thing, and I want Lee to listen to this too. We just got this in. The helicopter, and you told us it was a Augusta Spa, 8 seats, 2 engines, but listen to this. It looks like a tour helicopter. It took off from the West Side helipad, went south on the Hudson River with an eventual destination, we are told, of Linden Airport. Now, how did it come east and north? I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah, that's our reaction too in the newsroom. It was going. It took off from the West Side helipad, which is at 34th or something, and the river south on the Hudson River. Eventual destination Linden Airport. And as Lee said, if you just do the coagulated, you know, charted graphic here. Lee said there was little visibility at that time, down to a half a mile.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Bill, but if he was headed south on that West Side helipad, these rain bands had been coming in from the south and east, so he may have had better visibility even upon takeoff and may have flown into that rain band, which was probably about 5 or 10 miles wide, so he may have flown right into it.
And so did he decide to come back?
Right.
Did he lose his bearings? Shannon, I don't want to conjecture, but, you know, what are you thinking as a pilot?
Yeah, you know, you don't want to conjecture here, but all of the signs are pointing in sort of that direction. Of course, there was going to be an ongoing investigation, but also coupled with the video that I saw of the helicopter coming in and out of the clouds and descending so rapidly and then gaining altitude again, and the fact that there wasn't communication with ATC, so that you guys know that is a flight plan that we take quite often. You know, sometimes we're covering breaking news stories and we will go in to the West Street heliport and then come back to Linden. Linden is where we actually take off of. So how he wound up here does not make a ton of sense unless you start to factor in the weather, which Lee has been doing such an amazing job of telling us exactly how it looks. And I can tell you right now, we just checked the weather that the pilots check before we take off. And right now at LaGuardia, it's reporting broken clouds at 700 feet and overcast at 1,200. But that being said, I'm walking outside of my office right now and passing my helicopter, which is safely in its hangar. When I look out here, there is no way I would think about taking off in this weather. It literally looks a little bit like pea soup. And the other thing that Lee has been mentioning again is that when you get into the Midtown area, winds get squirrely as well. I think visibility is going to be a really big factor in this investigation. This is one of those days where even without looking at all the stats and looking at the weather reports, we wouldn't think of going up. That's how bad it looks out from our vantage point. And again, this is a twin-engine aircraft. The pilot is likely instrument rated. The pilot is instrument rated.
Shannon, I'm going
to be able to fly that.
I'm going to interrupt you guys. We're beginning, we're told, the press conference with the mayor, the police commissioner, and the fire commissioner. And let's listen in as you see Mayor de Blasio, who was in Iowa yesterday, is now back in New York and about to field questions and make a statement.
We're ready?
I think we're about to begin. Let's listen in.
We had a very strange and a very troubling incident this afternoon here in Manhattan. Helicopter crashed into a building here. I want to say the most important thing first. There is no indication at this time that this was an act of terror, and there is no ongoing threat to New York City based on all the information we have right now. I've checked in with the fire department, police department, and buildings department. There is no danger of any kind to New Yorkers at this point. And what I'm going to tell you and what my colleagues are going to tell you is all preliminary information. I'm going to emphasize to everyone a full investigation is going on, but we have only preliminary information at this point in time. But what we do know is that one person died in this helicopter crash. That person is presumed to be the pilot, but we are still waiting for absolute confirmation of that fact. There does not appear to have been any passenger in the helicopter, but again, we're waiting for absolute confirmation of that fact. We do not know the cause of this incident. I'm sure you're going to all want to ask that. We do not know the cause, but again, we have no indication that there was any terror nexus here. There were no other injuries that we know of at this point in time to anyone in the building or on the ground. And I want to just say, thank God for that. This could have been a much worse incident. And thank God no other people were injured in this absolutely shocking, stunning incident. I want to lastly say that the first responders performed an extraordinary effort here. I want to thank the fire department, police department, everyone, all the buildings department, all the agencies that responded.